Authority. We've got not a packed agenda, but we've got one item because of the importance of it being the climate and environment. It's something that doesn't matter whether you've got criticisms about it or not, it's there. We're going to have to do something about it, so it's an important subject to clarify. So before I go into the meeting formally itself, we did lose another one of our members, Councillor Geraldine Carter from Calderdale, who unfortunately passed away. And I originally asked Joe Thompson and Councillor Patient if they would say something. Well, Councillor Thompson's not here, so Councillor Patient, would you mind just saying a few words, please?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to say a few words about Geraldine Carter. For obviously a Calderdale councillor, anyone that knew Geraldine Carter knew how fierce she was, and I know Councillor Thompson will have a few words to say as well, having a lot of interaction with her, especially on markets. She was an absolute warrior, and I just want to express the sympathies of the Labour group within Calderdale, and for every group within Calderdale. We had full council a week or so ago, and people spoke very passionately and movingly about the contributions of Councillor Carter. She was absolutely committed to civic life. She served as Deputy Mayor of Calderdale on more than one occasion, was not afraid to tell people how she felt, and she did that with aplomb on many, many occasions. She was very frank with me on some issues over the years, but very, very respectful as well, and very thoughtful, and was always very considered when she was when there was a councillor in trouble or sick or on leave, was very thoughtful in how she spoke about them, and actually really committed to her residents. She served as a councillor in Brighouse, in Ryburn, so in a kind of town setting and in a rural setting, and could be seen all the time doing work in the community through volunteering, work through the Rotary Club, volunteering at various community events, and actually her contributions to the council chamber, I think, will be truly missed. The last council meeting we had was a lot quieter than usual and a much more and a sombre affair. So just wanted to say a few words and pass on my own thoughts, and just to say that we'll miss her, and I'm sure you guys will as well. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. There was a few people I wanted to mention when we're talking about Councillor Mrs Geraldine Carter, the Queen being one of them, Harry Gresham being another, Emmanuel Macron being another. These were all people who had the privilege of meeting Councillor Mrs Carter, and I'm sure were forever changed by the experience. One of the beauties of doing this role, being one of the youngest councillors in Calderdale, is actually engaging with people like Geraldine. We're from opposite parties, opposite ends of life, opposite walks of life, and actually some of my most interesting and most fulfilling conversations have been with her, because it's a perspective I would have never received otherwise. She is going to be a massive loss. She already has been a massive loss, and I think the people who spoke in our full council meeting expressed that in much better terms than I think I ever could. And I've been really touched by, national organisations coming forward and offering their sympathies. There was kind words from Scrutiny. The National Association of Borough Market Authorities have confirmed that they're going to be having an award in her honour. She was the first ever female president of that organisation, and from speaking to John Walker, who's our markets manager, he thinks she might have been the first ever woman to go to one of those meetings, when it was smoke-filled rooms and backdoor deals. So she has a legacy that goes far beyond just Calderdale, and that speaks to her commitment to public service, her commitment to wearing fantastic hats, and her commitment to telling you how she feels. And I think she'll be a huge loss here, she'll be a huge loss in Calderdale, and all our thoughts, of course, are with her family, friends and colleagues. So thank you, Chair, and apologies about the slight delay in getting here.
Apologies for absence.
Apologies have been received from Councillor Bithell, Councillor Edwards, Councillor Forster, Councillor Bowden, with Councillor Anna Watson substituting.
Thank you. Welcome, Councillor Watson. That's 2 in a row you've made now. Right, any declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests? No, if there's anything occurs, because I know it will occur, because we will be discussing it in the pre-meeting, if anything does occur as the meeting progresses in terms of conversations that take place or questions being asked. Right, in terms of item 3, possible exclusion of the press and public, there are none. The minutes of the meeting held on the 23rd of January, are they a true record? Can someone just say yes or no? And yes. And everybody vote? Yep, that's fine. Right, so we've got the major item, and the only item we've got today is the Climate and Environment Plan. Anna has been leading on behalf of Scrutiny on this particular one, and I'll leave it up to officers to say anything about it, but Anna has been passionate, as you would probably expect from a councillor like Anna, about moving this agenda forward and how she wants to see the West Yorkshire Combined Authority to be at the top of the list of implementing things. So, we'll just get the officers to introduce themselves. So, Mr Nutter, can you start and then we'll go round.
Yeah, good morning everyone. I'm James Nutter, I'm from the Transport Policy team. I'm the Lead Policy Manager for Transport Strategy.
Morning everybody, so Noel Collings, I'm the Policy Manager in the Place and Environment function of the organisation who looks after net zero and energy.
Morning everyone, I'm Scott Patient. I'm here on behalf of Councillor Jane Scullion, who is the Chair of the Climate, Energy and Environment Committee, but I'm also the Deputy Leader of Calderdale Council and lead on climate at Calderdale, as well as being a Vice Chair of the Yorkshire Humber Climate Commission as well.
Good morning everybody, my name is Ruth Davison, I'm the Interim Director of Environment and Place.
Morning everybody, my name is Jess McNeil and I'm Head of Home Energy West Yorkshire.
And can I publicly recognise that Ruth has joined higher echelon? She's had promotion, which is well deserved in terms of the work that I've done. She's been a very good friend to Scrutiny, always willing to take a call from me to discuss things, and as you would expect, we've had some wonderful conversations at times, back and forth and trying to get things sorted out, and she definitely has made a difference on the areas that she's been involved with. So, Noel, do you want to just briefly, or is Scott going to briefly, it doesn't matter who does it, just briefly set out any highlights in this paper, or anybody else who's wanting to do it?
I will take that honour. So I will take the report as read, but the report obviously updates Scrutiny on the implementation of the Climate and Environment Plan that was approved 10 months ago, and also provides an update on the work of our Home Energy West Yorkshire programme. It is worth noting that as the Climate and Environment Plan was produced, there was significant involvement of members in that process, including Scrutiny, but also the Climate and Environment Committee. When the plan was put together, it was authored looking through the lens of the different ways in which our organisation needs to create impact. So whether that's through leading, through our partnering at work, And because it was authored in that way, it has been aligned to the Devolution and Community Empowerment Bill in terms of where government's thinking is taking us as an organisation. That bill does now give the Combined Authority an area of competency around climate and environment, and that means that our work will now benefit from stronger powers and responsibilities in around collaboration and in terms of being able to convene partners together. So one example is set out in the report, which is around the strategic relationship with the National Wealth Fund and the benefit that that started to create in terms of the climate fund that is one of the key tenets of the plan. What the bill also does is it means that the Combined Authority will receive its integrated settlement from April. And what that does do is it opens up the opportunity to deliver against the plan with increased pace. And it also, the Combined Authority's intent to do that is outlined in the budget paper that was approved in January. You will see from the paper that the plan itself talks to two significant pathway areas of challenge for West Yorkshire, one being the decarbonisation of transport and the modal shift that's required. And the paper outlines some of the work that's taken place over the last 10 months, including things like the first phase of the franchising programme going out to the market, and also the £30 million investment in new fleet of zero emission buses that was approved by the Combined Authority in October. The second tenet of key activity was around how we create low carbon heating in homes. And obviously the statistics are quite stark in terms of that accounts for 30% of our emissions in the region. And Jess, who's with me today, leads the Home Energy West Yorkshire approach, which is actually a portfolio of different schemes that have to come together to achieve what's set out in the plan. So the plan again has some really very specific targets that have to be delivered by 2038, and those targets really link to retrofit of social homes but also private homes, increased solar panel usage, but also the heat network connections that we need to generate in West Yorkshire. So the report that we have today really, I think, sets out the foundational work that's been done over the last 10 months and actually the commitment that we've made and the targets that we've achieved so far, but this is really just the start of our journey on achieving that plan.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add to that as a member of the committee, as with other committees, we do have a public-private sector partnership in managing that, and Jane Atkinson from Infinium has been co-chairing that work, so it's very much been co-produced. Hopefully members of Scrutiny can get a flavour, but perhaps I can go a little bit further to kind of say that the work of the Climate Committee actually touches every area of the Combined Authority as a strategic authority, you know, not just what's been highlighted here in terms of energy, transportation and homes, but also the skills agenda, employment, regeneration, and all of those aspects too. So although I think it's great that we're going to be focusing in on some of the things that have just been mentioned, actually perhaps just to have in your back pocket, be mindful of where this touches some of the other directorate areas and committees that do exist within the Combined Authority that you might want to think of, including nature actually, and probably members will be aware that the local nature recovery strategy is in its final stages. I think it's due to finish the public consultation or final level in about 2 days, so to be mindful of that as a backdrop as well to the discussions today. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that. I read it off here. Work is ongoing on pilot schemes and ensuring there are enough high-quality tradespeople, but the scale of the challenge is large. What are the barriers for us to reach our 100% target of retrofitted social homes? As the report indicates, we have only done 1.8% so far.
Oops, sorry. Thank you, Ruth. Just to clarify, yes, that the 1.8 figure in there is just of the previous rounds that we've done. So wave 1, the booster, and 2.1, which is just coming to a close. Wave 3 that we're currently now moving into, that will deliver a further over 5,000 social homes over the next 3 years. And as Ruth has just advised, as we're moving into integrated settlement, we have just this week received confirmation of a top-up onto that plan, and that will allow us to do a further number of homes in the thousands. We're just clarifying the programme of that, so that will continue at pace. The fact that the government funding is fully funding that work really affords us the opportunity to build forward social housing decarbonisation, which is one of our key areas of delivery within Home Energy West Yorkshire. In regards to the skills, we're working very closely with our colleagues in skills team to identify the skills base that's needed across retrofit, but it's coming into that broader construction area. And it's not necessarily just new skills, it's reskilling long-standing gas engineers into maybe diversifying their own skills, but also identifying to young people and school leavers what the opportunities are in that green climate and green sector. There's a lot of work to do. We are seeing some challenges around those peaks and troughs of skills and supply chain, largely due to where the funding comes in. At the moment, it's been very much peaks and troughs. So the inclusion into integrated settlement will allow us to be much more pragmatic with our programme of delivery, and hopefully that will then give confidence to the supply chain to invest in that skill growth over a much considered and consecutive period of time.
Yeah, I'm conscious there's something coming up on the integrated settlement straight afterwards, but in terms of, it's really good you mentioned skills, because actually I think that's something that you're likely to see, in areas where you'll get funding and you'll get all these people trained up, and then immediately they'll go off and go into work. So is the feeling that once it gets into the integrated settlement, it'll be a lot more stable in terms of how that looks going forward?
We certainly hope so. That will be the case, yes. The Warm Homes Plan, which is well received, and I'm grateful that that's finally come out. It does obviously commit some significant funding and contributions to domestic decarbonisation. The detail is still there to be coming though, around when we will get further funding, what that will look like, what our regional position will be. But ensuring, as we are at the moment, working closely with our colleagues in skills and the green economy, that we're building together those key messages, that what we need from a housing decarbonisation is being worked through into those skills and supply chain sectors.
Thank you, Chair. Just following on from a lot of what has just been said, there's a confusingly large number of pots of money involved in the retrofit programme. The Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, Warm Homes Social Housing Fund Wave 3, Social Housing Enabling Programme, West Yorkshire Housing Partnership, you get the idea. To what extent are these being rolled into the integrated settlement, and how will this affect project delivery? And does the Combined Authority believe that the goals of the Climate and Environment Plan could be better achieved by including further funds in the integrated settlement scope?
Thank you, Councillor. Absolutely. I mean, just listing those is a demonstration of how protracted the funding does come into us as an organisation, and therefore how it's difficult for us to plan long term for programmes that can be really effective. Our programmes and projects come in waves of sort of 3-year funding rounds, but it takes sometimes a year to get mobilised in terms of the contractors, the procurement, and starting on site. So we can lose quite a lot of the time in that preparation stage. The another elements of funding that we've tried to complement that, to try and ease that cyclical event. We are very much hoping that the inclusion into integrated settlement will appease that, and we can be much more confident in building long-term plans. As we've said, we've had some clarification of top-up funding that will come in April of this year, but the longer-term funding from April of next year in the integrated settlement is currently yet to be confirmed, but we will be working to influence and challenge government that that funding does reflect the West Yorkshire challenges that we've got, in order that we do then have the capacity and the funding and the confidence to bring forward long-term programmes of investment.
Yeah, just briefly, I've lost the page in the report, but you mentioned with one particular fund there was a risk of if there's underspend, then that being clawed back by central government. Is that something that you're also kind of looking at? Because it's almost like punishing people for being more efficient in a way.
Yes, we're having live conversations with DESNZ, the Department for Energy and Net Zero. That underspend is reflected on some of the challenges that we've had to date, which we're looking to rectify around stock data and our regional housing providers not having the depth of knowledge of their portfolio that's needed. So we make bids on assumptions of stock data, but actually when we go out to deliver it, they're actually in maybe better condition, or they're not eligible for the funding that we've been given through DESNZ. So that then generates this need for us to reprofile, and in some instances does provide an underspend. We're working actively with DESNZ to understand how we can reallocate that so we keep it in the region, reflecting that we are now actively delivering the Wave 3 and that underspend has come from 2.1, and to understand how the region can retain that funding for the ongoing work that we want to continue with.
Sorry, this question might be to a number of you. So obviously in the report it does reference the issues that we've got with the DNO. So it would be good to get more of a flavour about what are we doing as a combined authority to make sure that our projects are being prioritised. And also, and this one might be for you, Scott, what role is there for the Mayor in taking this issue to the national government? And if you know of anything that she's particularly doing on that, that would be helpful to know. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Absolutely, you will see in the paper the particular programme that we're really struggling with, the social housing solar PV programme, which has afforded us some real challenges from a delivery. Not wholly, I should say, but largely down to the district network operator process that we have to go through, which applies to understand the electricity provision into a home and whether that is capable of facilitating solar and a battery. That process is quite protracted. It does tend to change partway through. Our regional housing providers have tried to be as proactive as they can be in submitting large applications of multiple properties in order that they can start that process with 500 units, 1,000 units, so that we get that process ongoing. That has not afforded us the scale of pace that we would like to see. We are very aware of the impact that will have on our collective ambitions around solar. The Warm Homes Plan also refers very heavily to the technology and the solar PV provision that could be allocated to our homes. We're currently doing a piece of work to understand the scope and scale of our collective partners' work streams, where solar PV is very much needed, in that we can, and we do have regular conversations with MPG, but we need to really add weight now to, we've learnt a lot through the solar programme for the social housing. Our aspirations and our pipelines are considerable on solar PV, and we need that relationship with MPG to be far stronger, for them to recognise the pipeline activity that we've got coming forward, and how we can then weave in an understanding of a better process that they can work with us for it to be more timely and more efficient and effective than it currently is.
Yeah, that's fine, thank you. It's a really good point, actually, and something we all need to be cognizant of. I think where we are in terms of being a combined authority, and one within Yorkshire that now has 4 of them, is in a better place than perhaps we would have been, 5-10 years ago. I think at the moment, although there's lots of lobbying on this stuff going on behind the scenes from the likes of the Commission, UK 100, Green Alliance, and all of those groups, I think at the moment it's something that officers here and elsewhere are escalating as a point before it comes to that bit where mayors get involved. But I think there's definitely a role for us as elected members to be applying some of that pressure in our own locales to make sure our sort of voices are being heard on this issue, because without that sort of logjam being stopped, we are in a place that does cause some problems that hopefully Jess laid out just then.
Do you want to come back in again?
So if you were going to have to rate the solar then, so kind of, on a kind of risk profile, do you think that it's at risk because of what's happening with the DNO? I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but it feels like at the moment we haven't quite got the solution. So it's something obviously for us as Scrutiny that we need to keep aware of and keep trying to find out what's going on?
Very much so. We do rag rate this particular project as red, and we have done and been having quite honest and open conversations with our climate committee members around this particular programme. We've realised that our collective appetite for solar will be significantly impacted if we are to continue on the process that we are going through here. So we do need to be putting our collective heads together to understand how we can work towards a more effective process. Yeah.
Sorry, Chair. I was just going to add a little bit of context in terms of the broader outside of kind of just that retrofit piece. So in terms of the engagement that we're doing with the DNOs and particularly Northern Power Grid, so it's probably fair to say that we're moving from that them being in a reactive position to now trying to get into a place where we're being more proactive in terms of those conversations. So there's a number of things to kind of reflect where we're going to. So they are committing now to having much more regular dialogue with us as an organisation on what is it our priorities, what are our growth aspirations in the region, what is it that our evidence base is saying when it comes to climate, and what do they need to be factoring in to their scenario planning, their future energy scenarios, which is what they base some of their business plan on. So we've got the emerging kind of much better relationship with Northern Power Grid, and that continues through the fact as well Northern Power Grid sit on our climate committee too, along with Northern Gas Networks, who are obviously the gas distribution operator in this region as well. We're in a really interesting position now as well, given that Northern Power Grid are in the very early stages of developing their next business plan. So the business plan that covers the period from 2028 to 2033. So this is a really good opportunity now to make sure the priorities that we have as a region are really being reflected in what they're planning for as they go forward into the future. They're also being involved quite heavily in the development of our local area energy plans. So they sit on our steering group. So they're bringing that really helpful industry knowledge and perspectives to play out across the evidence base that we're developing through our LEAPs as well. So that's really encouraging, and probably is in a position where they weren't able to do that maybe a couple of years ago. So they're actively recognising that combined authorities are really pushing into this area, and they need to engage a lot better in that space. And then the final piece just to mention is above that kind of DNO level is the relationship that we are developing with the National Energy System Operator. So that is the organisation which is connected to government that is developing something called the Regional Energy Strategic Plans. They are going to be really important going forward in terms of making sure our growth priorities as a region are being factored into the plans for the energy sector and the energy reform measures that are coming in the future. And you may have seen the fact that they published something called the Transitional Regional Energy Strategic Plan. I'll try not to go into all the acronyms and everything. At the end of January, which we fed quite a lot of information into as an organisation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I guess this is directed to Jess in the first instance and possibly to others. My question's about retrofitting in large-scale residential projects, and in particular, how well do you think lessons are being learned from the delivery and commissioning challenges that are faced by local authorities? Can I give you a couple of examples? A case of council officers facing challenges trying to deliver housing upgrades and repairs for vulnerable tenants, and difficulties with getting access to the property, encouraging tenants who may be reluctant to decant from the property so that the work can be done. And the second one is something in my own experience, a large-scale retrofit of heat pumps on a social housing high-rise. And it's sort of faced a lot of problems through the system as a whole being underpowered and having to be backed out, and boilers and generators substituted for the interval until it can be put back in, the supplier going into administration, that kind of thing. How are you set up to learn from what's happening in these local authorities here, and perhaps also other combined authorities, and pooling experience? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. So the first element around how do we engage with our tenants, we've learned an awful lot through the social housing work around how we engage with tenants. That communication and engagement from the outset is absolutely key. The social housing schemes are 100% funded by the government, but we are seeing a 26% refusal rate from tenants in order for those works to happen. And they're largely down to tenants not fully understanding the process, so that there's an error there in terms of how that's being communicated, for them to understand the number of steps along that process. Sometimes before even work start, there can be between 6 to 9 surveys on a property. Is that fully explained to residents for them to understand that that's the steps that they will have to go through? How do we streamline that? How do we make that less intrusive to them in terms of living in their homes on a daily basis? It can be quite intrusive. If we've got vulnerable tenants, young families, people that are pregnant, they may not want these people coming into their homes on a regular basis, and how that intrudes in their homes. So we are working now to really improve our resident liaison approach through communication, clarity of information, having a regular person that's visible that residents can respond to, can rely upon, can ask questions of at any point. Decanting is an issue. We don't have our registered housing providers. That includes our Leeds City Council and Kirklees Council. They've retained their social housing. Don't have an abundance of empty homes, so we can't move tenants out for long periods of time while works are being done. So how do we manage that process sensitively and respectfully to the residents that are trying to live in their homes and can be going through some very difficult situations? So we're looking at options of how we work maybe together, in that one social housing could possibly go to another social housing provider's tenant if they do have empty homes, that we really work collaboratively in that approach. So we're very much learning around that initial process to reduce that 26% refusal rate. These are benefits that will be happening to people's homes. It will reduce their energy bills. It will make their homes warmer, and a more pleasant place to live. And it's fully funded. So we really want to bring those refusal rates down. And we work very closely with our registered housing providers alongside Kirklees and Leeds City Council to really understand those issues, so that we can share lessons learned, we can share good practice, and we can all benefit from that. In terms of the large scale of heat pump installations, you'll all be aware of the archetypes that we have across West Yorkshire and the challenging homes that we have. High rise being one, a lot of pre-1919 homes, 23% of homes in West Yorkshire pre-1919. So back-to-backs, heavy terraced houses, they can be difficult to retrofit. So we've done some really good schemes with Leeds City Council, where we've done some work with 100 back-to-back properties in Armley. And we're doing a detailed design piece of work at the moment now in that area, where we're looking at ground source heat pump solutions. So it's a clean technology where the infrastructure and information that goes into homes is the size of a shoebox. So they don't need the huge or the scale of infrastructure or intervention in their homes that the traditional heat pumps need, because they can't afford the space, that it's not physically possible. So we're looking to understand how we can address those unique challenges for the archetypes that we have in the region, in order that everybody can benefit from those clean energy sources.
Just briefly to add to that, Chair, if I may, just on the issue about our registered providers, social housing providers, a number of them already, I'm going to use Together Housing as an example, because I know the work that they do crosses boundaries, and they're one of our larger ones. Actually, the retrofit work that they're doing, which isn't just about putting heat pumps in, but it's that fabric first approach, and thinking about what the place looks like as well, so recladding and reshaping, is is paying dividends in terms of enhancing some of those voices that were perhaps sceptical of that work at first, but are then going back into their homes that look better, that are cheaper to run, that are warmer, and making sure that they're using their own internal networks to sort of amplify the voices of perhaps people that aren't interested in the climate agenda, that don't really buy it, but that then, you know, have seen the change and what that means. You touched then, Jess, on the kind of retrofit demonstrator model and the pre-1919 stone builds, and there's a project of that happening in our borough as well, in fact in Councillor Thompson's ward, you know, so thinking about what that decanting can look like, not just learning actually about the archetypes and what the work does, but learning about how the process of engaging with people that are there in mixed tenures, so some owner-occupiers, some that are leasing, you know, and all those kind of things in between. And very much kind of re-emphasising the fact that the council's housing teams are taking that data, taking that learning and feeding back to the combined authorities, so that knowledge is there and being fed back. Thank you.
Ruth.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add, because my substantive role, it was Head of Strategy and Corporate Performance. So one of the things that we are doing as a combined authority is thinking about our systemic approach to lessons learnt and how we embed that, so how we work with our partners to create the lessons learnt from our programmes. We then actually don't just consider that linked, as Jess does, in relation to home energy, but how those lessons apply across all of what we do. So we are just actually due to produce a report on our thinking around how that should happen.
Sorry, Councillor Rowntree, do you want to come back in again?
Thank you, Chair. Yep, thanks for that. That's encouraging, and particularly the emphasis that you put on the importance of communication and talking to people, and at least as importantly, listening to the people as you get started. I just think it sounds like you're at quite an early stage of this, but do you have? I know you do talk to local authorities, obviously. Do you have sort of mechanisms? Is there some kind of library so that we, in the early stages of a project, people are in a position to say, well, I wonder what's gone before, and what does Wakefield know about this? What does Leeds know? What does South Yorkshire CA know, perhaps?
Thanks, Councillor. I can come in on that. So we meet monthly with our local authority partners and our registered housing providers to do just that. It's very informal, it's quite cathartic. We learn lessons around how things have gone, where things may have needed some extra consideration and planning in advance, and that's so that we can all share from how we approach things. As Councillor Patient has said, we've got 3 smaller area-based schemes which has afforded us an awful lot of learning around how we deal with difficult to treat homes, and we'll share that learning and the evaluation with all of our partners in order that we can understand both the people but also the property learnings. Did the technical solution, was that right? How did we approach that communication with the residents in order that we can learn all the time and continue to do that? We have also now created a SharePoint hub for resident liaison officers working across West Yorkshire that they can feed into good practice, guides, questions to ask, processes to follow when they're at the outset of working with residents. And that's a live SharePoint, so we can feed into that, and anybody can build good practice, any leaflets that they've developed for their own projects and programmes, in order that there's a sharing of the learning and documents used there.
First of all, can I say I've been through a retrofit many, many years ago, and I think the strategy that's outlined and your intentions in terms of the tenants stroke residents is the most important part of everything else in your report. There are many questions that have to be asked, or you may want them in advance, for tenants stroke residents, and they are: you can't decant because there aren't the ability to decant now as there was previously as a choice. So you've got to work around the tenants' families living in their properties. One of the big issues, and I think it does need addressing at that level, not up here, down here with the tenants and residents, one of the big issues is the support that they get in terms of moving around their own home while you've got contractors in. The second thing is what support will be given in terms of any costs, in terms of redecoration, re-evaluation of what's needed to be done in the property. That also encompasses everything to do with the living conditions of those tenants. Perhaps the 26 need that information, the 26%, about what you go back to or what you live in. What's the state of your house going to be, your flooring, everything else like this? Is there within that offer the issue about any redecoration that needs to be done? Because these are all things that the tenants in retrofits in here think, my God, how am I going to manage this? What's it going to leave me with to do, etc. One of the big issues, if you're doing it as well, is the interior, the wall insulation. What kind of insulation you're going to be using to keep the heat in. Some properties have what we call ties in that are very difficult to insulate. But all of this is about the tenant and the resident in the area. I'm really pleased to hear that you have people out on the ground, so to speak. You can look at everything in a report, but when it comes to the actual work in your property, that's the bit that the tenants need to know. And having somebody there is so important. A house, whatever you can in the area that people can go and talk to somebody about. The last issue in this paper here today, and Harry has touched on it, Chair, is the amount of companies, we'll say, who are going to be involved in delivering for you. That is so important because obviously some of these companies, and we had the occasion in Wakefield, Chair, where they subcontract. And they subcontract, and I want personally to let you know that it was a disaster when it happened over when I was there. And the subcontractors, I'm sorry, in some occasions, not all, I actually went to take one off the subcontractors list in Wakefield, is the standard, the engagement, what the contract is going to be, what you expect of those people when they go into people's houses. Because there is a mentality that social housing doesn't need the same respect. That's got to be fully part of everything you do. Your 26% out there are as most valuable as the rest of the percentage across the area. So that's the package there. You can have everything down here in the report, and I will re-emphasise it. The main part of this, in terms of the procurement of services for the skills that you need, they have to be nailed down with standards that apply to subcontractors as well as the monitoring on the ground. And I think if you can do that for the tenants, in everything you've got in this report, the residents, and on top of that, Chair, the last thing that I think is very important is that when a workforce goes into an area to do the refit, the amount of vans and subbies that come along, you have vans all over the streets. That is an issue in terms of the local people. If they're living there, they need to be able to access their home. They need to be able to get out if they're in a car to go to work. That's the whole picture that out there has got to be put together in front of the people in terms of this is what we're doing for you and this is what we'll do to support you while you're in your home. That's an experience that I went through, and it's an experience that a lot of people went through in terms of subbies, and I hope that information is helpful to you from one who's experienced it. Thank you very much, Chair.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. A really helpful reflection, thank you. I think we absolutely cannot forget these are people's homes. It's very emotive, this process. So we need to be very respectful and ensure that, you know, we are clear in people's questions and queries and concerns, because they are genuine and rightly they have them. I just want to touch on the point you were making around some of those enabling works. Absolutely, where there are costs are covered for reasonable enabling works, redecoration. If carpets need to be pulled up, they are relaid. There is an ongoing issue around where we're wanting to put in roof insulation. People are using the roof space as rooms. Obviously, you know, they're growing families, they need to. So how do we support them in losing a room maybe for a couple of days. How can we assist them in that reorganisation during that time? One of the other area-based schemes that we've got in Bradford at the moment, they're doing some internal insulation to the rear wall of the properties, and in order to allow that, new bathrooms have been put in because the bathrooms have had to have been taken out. So where there are reasonable works to facilitate the energy efficient measures to go in, they are absolutely undertaken. But just learning some of your thoughts there around those day-to-day struggles that absolutely do become an issue for the residents that trying to live and go to work and have their everyday lives. They're really reflective, and we will reflect those. I also, just the final point for me around the quality of standards of work. For all government funded work, they have to adhere to PAS 2035, and that's a quality standard installation that all contractors have to adhere to. And there are regular checks and monitoring independently by external contractors that go out and do those checks. And they're part of the process that has to be then lodged with Trustmark before we can say that the property has been fully completed in those government schemes. We are looking to sort of allocate the same principle for schemes where we're supporting those through our customer advice service. Where residents pay for it themselves, that's not mandatory, but we want to ensure that contractors are applying the same quality standards of installation and measures in order that we do not see any of those very unpleasant scenarios coming through.
Councillor Merritt.
Yes, thank you. It's very good to hear about those area-based schemes, but at the end of the day, they are very, very small numbers. And in terms of your approach for the sort of private sector, the main part of that appears to be very much the, dealing with individual house owners. But against the scale of the challenge that we face, and also the issue, the economics of it, area-based approaches obviously starts to deliver the scale and opportunities for economies of scale. Is this focus on supporting individual people in the private sector really the right approach? Is it credible in terms of actually delivering your target of 355,000 homes by 2038? And is it the best use of public money?
Thank you, Councillor. Just to say, those figures in terms of reaching net zero for a domestic specific position, the Combined Authority can't deliver that on its own. It's what role we take in that, and how through the activities that we're doing, we are raising confidence, awareness, people understanding the process that they can individually take in order that they then are part of that process. We don't have enough funding. There isn't enough funding for us to provide that level of support, as you said, for 335,000 homes, which is the 50% of the owner-occupier homes that the target would need to be in order for us to be net zero by 2038. So it's through the work that we're doing that we raise awareness, we test technology, we challenge, again, our manufacturers and installers to get cost-efficient processes and works underway. You're absolutely right. The area-based schemes that we are coming to a conclusion on, they have been expensive for the numbers of outputs, but what they have tested is innovative technology. How do we work to address hard-to-treat properties? How do we engage effectively with the residents in there, which, as Councillor Patient said, they're multi-tenure, so they're not social housing residents. What that has allowed us to do is take the learnings for that for 2 further schemes that we're bringing forward, where they're minimum 500 properties coming forward. So we're significantly stepping up there from the numbers for future schemes. So we're currently working through a business case for a scheme in Wakefield, and we're doing some early design development work following on from the phase 1 in Leeds, where we're looking at ground source heat pumps that could afford heating solutions, again, for a minimum of 500 homes. So again, they're you know, they're not the hundreds of thousands, but they are those scaled up approaches. And if we can demonstrate, again, through those schemes, the ability, the success, how these schemes can be developed, multi-partnered, multi-funding, those will be really welcomed for us to bring forward more. The way that those two schemes we're hoping will be pipeline, in the Warm Homes Plan, it refers to low-income household offers, and we've been indicated that we will start to get some of that funding from April 2027, and that will be multi-tenure, area-based, street-by-street schemes, which these two further area-based schemes will be just that. So if we can be on the front foot for that funding coming through, because we currently need, you know, that funding in order to take those forward, that will allow us to really step up that approach to bringing forward those energy efficient measures on those multi-tenure schemes.
Yeah, very much welcome the latter, and I wasn't criticising the area-based schemes because actually I think that's the way to go. I think my challenge was about the approach to basically supporting individual house owners, which is even more expensive to do, but also is likely to deliver significantly less results because of the costs involved, because you haven't got the scale to get the cost down, and it's very random, and it, you know.
Sorry, Councillor. So on the current area-based schemes that we've got, they were taken forward specifically to test technology. They are low in numbers, and it's a fair reflection in terms of what we will learn from that, but that has afforded us to scale up that approach. In terms of owner-occupiers, the customer advice service that we've got is providing the signposting, the information, the support for them to come forward and be more proactive themselves, where they are willing and wanting to take some, to deliver energy efficient measures on their homes. We have the loan that supports that. It's a low interest loan product, and that's a really market attractive scheme that they can deliver the measures through their own homes. We're also about to launch a second phase of our collective buying scheme, and that very much works on resident buying power, where the more people involved, the more cost effective the installation is. We had 645 installations of solar PV and battery in phase 1, and those households received 43% saving on the installation. So those really show where we can apply those innovative approaches. We can start to scale up some of those numbers, reducing all the time the cost on the public purse for those owner-occupier private landlord situations.
Councillor Smith.
Thanks. I'll try and keep this brief in terms of like elongating questions. So you've talked quite a bit about heat pumps in general, and then you've mentioned ground source heat pumps. So before I ask my main question, I'm assuming that most of the stuff you're talking about is air source heat pumps. Yeah. So the bit that I'm really questioning is, I've heard anecdotal evidence, and I'm quite prepared to accept this as wrong. And there's a second component to this question which I'll sort of come on to. I'm asking really about older homes, and you have mentioned this, but how efficient is this concept of a heat pump in an older home in comparison with a traditional, probably a gas-fired central heating system? And I'm asking this really not because I'm not trying to play devil's advocate at all here. I'm interested really in the, you know, if somebody's got a nice warm home, for example, at the moment, and then you rip out the stuff they've got and put in a heat pump, is there a... So the second part of the question is, you mentioned about extra insulation and stuff. Say you did nothing else but just put the heat pump in. How efficient would that be in terms of providing heat to that house? So this is not a trick question. This is really about enlightening me, because I've read all these horror stories, and I'm thinking, are they horror stories, or is there an element of truth in it? So, you know, really the question is, if you were to do nothing, put in a heat pump, how warm would that house be? And then sort of the second part of it is, how much extra do you need to do? And, you know, so it's all sort of combined in that. And I did say I was going to be brief, didn't I? But I wasn't. Not as bad as some, though, I have to say.
No, thank you, Councillor. From an efficiency point of view, a heat pump is very efficient, 4 times more efficient. But there's 2 factors here, or multiple factors. How people use and heat their home. We're all different human beings, aren't we? We're not, you know, how often we're at our home, how we use our home. Do we work from home? Do we need it from a medical point of view? You know, if we have a health issue, we might need to have our heating on more. So that's one factor. Heat pumps work as effectively as they can if the house is well insulated. So if you know, as Councillor Patient was saying, our preference is fabric first. So you've well insulated the home, because then the heat pump retains the heat within the home. It's not lost through any drafts or windows or walls that aren't well insulated. But the biggest factor is the cost of energy compared to gas. And, you know, running a gas boiler versus a heat pump, you know, energy price at the moment are 4 times more expensive than gas. So the investment that you made initially, it may not appear that you're getting, you know, best value for money because of the energy prices to run that. But a heat pump in its own right is a very efficient and effective way to heat your home with those multiples and caveats that we've just set out.
Let's come back in again, Richard.
So I want to like this idea, I really do, but you've not really convinced me, if I'm honest, from that answer. You know, the caveats are basically, yeah, you've got to do a load of insulation and the load's more expensive. So I really would like to get on board with this, but I'm reluctant to believe what I'm hearing, and you've not convinced me otherwise, if I'm really honest. I don't want to be rude, but I really, you know, so you can insulate a home now with a gas boiler in it and make it loads warmer. So that's my point. You know, the heat pumps, and then you've said they're really loads more expensive because of the price of electricity. So, you know, I'm still remaining sceptical, if I'm honest. I'd like to not be, but I am still remaining pretty sceptical. I'd like to think you could get a nice warm home without spending loads of money and without banging like loads of extra stuff, because you do that anyway. I could go and re-insulate all my house walls at the moment and keep my gas boiler and get warmer. So that, yeah, thanks.
I think, as I reassured you, Councillor Smith, when you were thinking about that question, I live in a house with a heat pump and my house is warmer and our electricity bill is less. And we didn't have to do internal wall insulation. So I think there's lots of brilliant, fantastically good examples out there, but I know it's complicated, maybe depending on people's expectation of of what they expect, and if they want to have their house, you know, at 25 degrees, it might be more complicated. However, so my question is also kind of also about heat pumps. So in the strategy, we say on page 46 of the strategy, but it might be 73 of our pack. I don't know which way round the numbers are on those. We need to fit 838,000 heat pumps and connect 205,000 homes to the heat network. I was going to talk about solar, but I think we've already covered what are some of our barriers there with our solar targets. So it would be great to know, and I'm sorry if they're in here and I've not seen them. We've got that target. What is the process so far on that? And I imagine there are indicators that also the Climate Committee asked for. So I'm not sure who's going to take that one. Thanks.
I'll start then, Councillor Patient's going to come in. Apologies, I don't have the exact figures on the heat pumps. I should have those with me, but we're seeing, so there's a blend of how the heat pumps are coming forward. I should also say, as I said earlier, that fitting of the 838,000 again is not for the combined authority to deliver in its own. It's how we work together with the industry, with our partners, to get that confidence of installation of that infrastructure. But there's 2 areas that's coming forward with our social housing providers. That's a key element of their work streams. But we are also seeing a number of heat pumps coming through our loan product. And we've seen, again, I don't want to quote figures, apologies. When we may be talking on other items, I can find those exact figures. But we're seeing heat pumps coming through our loan applications. In addition to that, what we're also doing now is learning off the back of the collective buying scheme, phase 1, which was solely solar and PV. we're broadening the measures that residents can come forward with to include heat pumps, insulations, solar PV and batteries also. So we're offering the tools and the avenues and routes for residents to come forward and take the action to install heat pumps. The information that's available through our customer advice service is around informing and maybe dispelling some of those myths on what a heat pump can do, just reflecting the conversation that we've just had now around the efficiency, the installation costs, the process, the benefits that it offers to homeowners, in order that we're continuously improving the position and the confidence of residents to install heat pumps.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you. Yeah, these were all considerations actually that the Climate Committee were thinking about as well while they're doing it. Obviously, here in West Yorkshire, our housing types are varied from your pre-1919 to the massive houses on the, built around hearths that are on the top, to, back-to-backs, to semis, to the suburbs and everything in between, really. So I guess understanding how we apply that is going to be key. Also, the tech's moving really, really quickly. So managing and understanding what that looks like, keeping up with the market, keeping up with the private sector and understanding that. So it's kind of no mean feat, really. It's interesting today, I didn't quite realise how heavy onto the homes and retrofit, but I should have guessed, really. It's a really interesting and I think key aspect of what we're doing in terms of what's needed to do to make people's lives better and to achieve those targets as well. But if there's anything I've kind of missed in there that you want me to address more directly about the Climate Committee's role in this, I'm happy to.
Oh, well, Scott, I was just, obviously we've got those targets are here, and I'm just wondering, is within your work at the committee, are these indicators that, you obviously you've got indicators, don't you? You look at, sort of how we're going on delivering on the plans that we have, including the climate plan. And I'm just wondering, are these key indicators for you? Because, we've been really bold and put figures here, which is wonderful because that makes our job as scrutiny so much easier. We can say, great. I mean, as we had with, we've got a 100% target for social homes. We've only done 1.8 so far, although there's more of a story there. My question is, we said we want to hit these targets, 838,000 heat pumps, connecting 205,000 to the heat network. How are we doing and what are the numbers at the moment? And I'm just assuming, Scott, that that's something that the Climate Committee will also be following, but because it's a really bold indicator and we've made a bold commitment.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, part of that is about understanding the evidence base and, how you have to work towards it. So every meeting that we have at the Environment Committee, Guillermo, who's one of our officers, comes to us and he's got those indicator points, and it actually ends up being quite a substantive item, even when there's quite chunky items in there, understanding what those monitor indicators look like, understanding how we shift and pull on them, because sometimes we have a really positive story in terms of the direction and the way things are going, and sometimes we don't, frankly, and it's our job as part of the committee to push back on that, to understand why, to learn the trends. Sometimes a bar chart on a piece of paper doesn't tell the whole story, as we're kind of hearing today. So the committee very much have a role on that and keep kind of pushing on those things, but I'm happy to kind of take that away in terms of understanding the indicators and making sure you as scrutiny understand how that work happens as part of the committee.
With all due respect to my colleague here, she asked for numbers and you spent 5 minutes not answering the question. If you don't know the numbers, say I don't know. If it's 300,000, say 300,000. But spending 5 minutes not answering the question.
Thank you, Councillor. Hopefully not quite 5 minutes, but hence at the end saying that we'll get back to you with perhaps more detailed numbers once we've come back. As I kind of said at the rise of the meeting, really, like climate is a broad area and we don't have every person in the room who could provide you with that, but we're happy to bring that back, Councillor. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My question is about new housing and the failure to build for the future. We've inherited an issue in older housing, retrofitting, putting heat pumps in, all the usual gubbins. And yet, within the new MPPF and the one that's being considered at the moment, there is nothing to change the direction of new builds to actually incorporate ground source heat pumps, air source heat pumps. We've actually taken a retrograde step by removing battery storage. So my question to you is, what are the combined authority and the mayor doing to exercise their soft powers in government to make sure this kind of thing happens? Because we're going to find ourselves in a position in 10 years' time where we're going to have lots of new homeowners and social homeowners who are going to have to retrofit from gas back to air source. So it's a problem in the making, but I do notice that in the report there is a Yorkshire-based company, a West Yorkshire-based company that manufactures heat pumps. So why don't we get two sides of the equation talking to one another and get economies of scale to get these things done rather than putting in traditional gas supplies?
So I think it's a very valid point, isn't it, that we need to build for sustainable housing, and I think, you know, this is my second week in the role, but what I would say is that no, I think it's a fair challenge. We definitely have a place-based strategic partnership with Homes England, where some of these issues around how we build and what we should build are discussed at that strategic level, and that meeting is actually chaired by the mayor. I think it's something that we can take away from scrutiny and perhaps think about whether we actually feed into that in a stronger way than we have done to date.
I think, as I said, the impact is in local employment, particularly as we've got heat pump manufacturing just up the road. I think it's towards Huddersfield. But I actually develop housing. We stick all this stuff in as a matter of due course. So, and we can make money, and it's not that much more expensive for house owners. So we need to change the direction of travel.
And I think, I know the last scrutiny was on the local growth plan, and as you're aware, one of our clusters is around green, the green cluster. And from my perspective and the conversations that I've had with Felix previously, the link between what we're doing from a retrofit perspective and getting like in the forefront and putting that into new homes is part of what that cluster is set up to consider. Definitely working with our local businesses and seizing any opportunity there is to support them to grow.
Thank you, Chair. A question not about homes, which is quite a change, quite a change. But at this point, I probably do need to point out that declare an interest. My partner is an employee of DB Eurocargo. It's relevant to the next question. Thank you. So really, if you could just tease out for us what engagement there's been with rail freight around the issues, around the issues of air quality and infrastructure. It's mentioned a couple of times in the report, but as ever, it always seems to be the poor relation. It seems to be, yes, we need to talk about rail freight. Anyway, let's talk about the next thing. So I think if you could just sort of explain a little bit more about that, then.
Yeah, so no, thanks for the question on transport. So I'll take that. So the short answer is I have to take that away and find out exactly what conversations we are having. I'm not party to those, but we do have, through the Mayor, a strategic rail partnership where we work closely with the rail industry. I think previously it was dominated by the passenger rail industry, but we do have an rail strategy and our emerging local transport plan ambitions for more capacity on the railway for rail freight, but I'm afraid I can't tell you exactly what conversations we've had with freight operating companies.
Okay.
Did anybody else add anything to that or not?
No. So could I just come back just briefly, as there's no more information on the table, just briefly. We had 3 kind of spheres of control or influence on page 45, and it seems to me that at the moment it belongs somewhere in degree of control and influence and advocacy. It belongs somewhere in those outer reaches rather than direct control, which is fine, and that's a given. But it does seem to me that with the opportunities there could be it's a game changer to get rail freight on board with this and to build case to government, which if that's where it lies, then to build the case for government to intervene, then that's where we should be involved as a combined authority. I mean, even if it's only in terms of tyre wear particulates that make up a massive amount of microplastics in the ocean and are in the air as well. So there just seems to be an opportunity there there's some kind of sleeping giant in the room, if you like.
Patient, do you want to just respond?
Only briefly, yeah, thank you. And to add to the don't know of that, just to kind of say that more work is being done through the Climate Committee and the Transportation Committee in terms of like joining up these two areas and making sure that joint workshops are happening to understand some of that overlap. I know that's definitely was a concern and from members of the Climate Environment Committee back in the day in terms of doing that work in isolation and the need to link up with what's already happening in the Combined Authority. But I absolutely take your point. I think that's right. Thank you for bringing up transportation.
Mr. Nussler?
Yeah, I was just going to add that if we look at the local transport plan case for change that we've developed, we at the moment HGVs, heavy goods vehicles and light goods vehicles account for around about 40% of road transport emissions. So that's a huge number, and as that's the part of the vehicle sort of fleet which is more challenging to decarbonise. So we do have some pretty strong targets to increase sort of rail freight ton kilometres by about 150% by 2038. So clearly, as you say, we're not a rail freight operator, we're not Network Rail, but we can work with the rail industry. We have been making the case with partners across the north over the past decade or more for things like the Transpennine route upgrade. That is from a purely agnostic point of view, that is a great thing, because that will provide more capacity on the railway to run, yes, more passenger and better passenger trains, but also more rail freight services as well. So, and there are announcements which you might be aware of, happened, I think in the new year around Northern Powerhouse Rail. It's all about capacity. More and more capacity is what we need on our railway to be able to run more rail freight on there. So I think there's positive things happening, but I'm afraid, back to the specifics, I can't give you that.
Councillor Merritt on this particular issue.
Yes, thank John for his response there. I mean, it also links to the decarbonisation agenda and rail electrification, because besides the shortage of paths for freight that you've talked about, the other key issue is electrified operation of freight is so much cheaper than conventional diesel hauled, and it also allows other routes to be brought in because the electric traction can actually get you over some of the steeper sections of railway that diesel struggles with. So if we really want to bring rail freight costs down and make them more competitive to get freight off-road onto rail, then filling in the gaps, the electrification gaps in the rail freight network is absolutely key, and I wonder how much that's been taken into account in the rail strategy and your priorities.
Before you answer that question, Councillor Berry wanted to bring in a similar point.
Unfortunately, as I understand it, being a little bit of a transport nerd, freight operators are actually using diesel in preference to electric because the cost of the electricity on the network, which is a counterintuitive thing. But I'm also concerned that in our approach that we're not just looking at freight that passes through the district, that we are looking at facilities. Bradford has one dormant facility, the other one is now being turned into a shiny new depot, but that used to be there are places where you could be using those old access points, those old yards or whatever, to build in new flows. The only new flow I'm aware of is at Ribblehead, where quite a lot of money has been spent, and that will come past where I live, which is very nice. But this bit about the rail industry is also about making sure that you do build in the capacity for freight, because at the moment, with all the decisions that seem to have been made, I think that industry is now saying it's being squeezed to one side, and that would not help us with our overall. I accept what you're saying about lorries being the big, but an old Class 66 is still emitting quite a lot of fumes, and at the moment they're putting those back on when they could be running electric, which seems daft.
So just on the first point around gaps in electrification, yeah, absolutely, there are. Obviously, you'll know all about the Transpennine Route electrification programme, so that's a gap that's being closed as we speak. Obviously, the announcement in the new year around the investment in Yorkshire's railway, so we're going to close the gap around the electrification of the line between here and Bradford Interchange, between here and Sheffield, and then obviously there's the questions then how do you get from here to the Humber ports and electrification, for example. So there's clearly a lot more to do, but it feels like it's heading in the right direction. In terms of the sort of freight terminals and depots and such like, I think that's a really good point, and that's one where I think we'll need to work as part of the spatial development strategy, I think it's called, with our local planning authority partners, to understand, look, where do these need to be going forwards? Where do we need to make provision? Because obviously freight is very much a market-led industry and sector, but clearly we're going to have there's a land use planning challenge here, which I think collectively as a region we need to make provision for as part of that exercise. So.
Thank you. There we go. Thank you. Sorry, Chair, it'd be remiss of me, and I'm sure James didn't do it on purpose, but it'd be remiss of me not to mention the Calder Valley line while we're talking about this, just because in our local transport plan it's mentioned as one of the top priorities, really. Clearly a key part between linking Yorkshire to Manchester, as well as a key trading partner. Sorry to get that in, but felt it was...
Yes, before I answer my question, obviously I'm quite interested in the link through to Colne, the railway from Skipton, but that's by the by. One of the biggest, if not the biggest impact immediately on the residents I represent, and presumably most across our area, is on flooding and a risk from that. And I wonder, obviously it's not a direct thing that the WIC are involved with, but the influence on both Yorkshire Water and the Environment Agency in addressing these issues, because come the summer, from Yorkshire Water expecting a hosepipe ban, which I think will be difficult to explain to our residents, many of whom have been flooded throughout the winter. So obviously we need more storage capacity, more capacity to hold things back, and it is to a degree addressed in here. What impact do you think you can have in improving this over the coming years, because it is a long project, to make life worth living for the people I represent in my flooded areas? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I should probably declare a level of interest, having flooded myself, my children's school, etc. So, yeah, it's a really good question, and thank you to the Combined Authority who do use some of their funding to fund some of the schemes we have, from natural flood management and civil engineering schemes that are being developed, have been delivered, and are about to be delivered in places like Calderdale, Kirklees, Bradford, etc. I think we're in a better place than we would have been 10 years ago, in the fact that the Environment Agency, Yorkshire Water, are at the table at the Climate Environment Committee, but I think we've got a heck of a ways to go. Mindful that the local nature recovery strategy piece of work is going to exist, which will hopefully give opportunities for big attenuation projects, natural flood management on large scales, for the private sector to invest in. But frankly, keeping the water away, we say it's like whack-a-mole in Calderdale. You solve one water-related problem and it pops up somewhere else in a watercourse that previously didn't have any issues, hence why we've got just flood alleviation schemes and funding coming out of our ears, and actually the risk is the increasing cost of delivering these schemes. Now clearly the cost differential based on what we think was the economic damage caused by flooding in Calderdale, for example, around £1 billion, that takes in insurance, infrastructure repairs, putting out grants and all that sort of stuff. I'm probably taking a long time to say it's a massive challenge, and the combined authority probably do have a role in it, but it's actually for national government, it's for local authorities, and it's for all of us to be putting that pressure on the EA, on Yorkshire Water, to deliver the schemes that they want. Because you're right, for me, last year, a really difficult discussion was telling people that there's a hose pipe ban, but then in the next breath, you know, that we're getting heavy rains, and how do you kind of square that circle? I think that's really challenging for us as councillors, but if there's something in there I've not answered directly, please do come back.
Back briefly. I mean, one of the obvious things that we're lacking in the area I represent is adequate reservoir capacity, and that's become increasingly challenging since the misguided privatisation of water. So I just wonder if WICA feels there's a role in pressurising Yorkshire Water for the development of that capacity, or whether it be any help at all.
I'm going to say I don't know to that one, and pass it on to a colleague.
So I think our specialist teams that are working on flood projects aren't here today, but what I can do is tell you some of the conversations that I've had since I've started around flooding. So obviously within the Mayor, I think, has used her convening powers with the other mayors in Yorkshire to hold a recent meeting with Yorkshire Water to hold them to account for some of the issues that our residents were experiencing. I don't think in that meeting necessarily reservoir capacity was raised, but that is something that we can take away to our colleagues who are more focused in this area to sort of see if that is something we should take forward. The combined authority does remain committed to helping be part of the partnership to tackle flooding. So the Environment Agency obviously do need match funding, local match funding, and so the budget paper that went in January did retain some funding towards the local match that's required for some of our flooding projects. The issue is that our pipeline is far bigger than the funding, same problem, far bigger than the funding that we have available. But again, colleagues in Calderdale recently have asked us for a letter of support in terms of the business case that's going through the Environment Agency at the moment. And so again, that soft power of the Mayor is being used to provide that letter of support for the business case. And also when we've come to have a look at that, thinking more strategically about the conversation between the Mayor and national government that leads to, really recognising that our integrated settlement could be stronger in that space, and lobbying government for, is this an area where more needs to be done to open up the capacity that combined authorities have to support the funding.
Through you, Chair, just a final note is, and I'd be happy to pick some of this conversation up outside of this meeting, but where we have had some success in Calderdale, try not to be too parochial, is that some of the drawdown of the reservoirs, especially the ones above Hebden Bridge, sort of being mindful of the statutory duty to provide water, but equally, you know, how it relates to drought has been successful. We've run pilots there for about 8 years. So that's something I've had discussions with the Mayor about, whether that could be applied elsewhere. As I say, happy to pick some of that up outside the meeting.
Thank you. I'd like to pick up on the numbers relating to jobs in the report. It states that net zero affects 235,000 jobs, 116,000 of those will require transitioning, so presumably will still exist in some form. New clean jobs, 71,000, which is obviously good news, but there does appear to be a deficit there, and what are we doing in terms of filling that deficit, especially when we're looking in other sectors where we're seeing deficits as a result of new technologies?
Right, according to my notes, it's a,
Yeah, we have found it now. Thank you, Chair, for the time just to find the right page. I think this forms probably part of the conversation that we have as part of our wider local growth conversation and our focus on skills. So as I know that you've had a recent session on that, there's obviously significant amount of funding that's going to support people when in work to retrain and upskill. And I think that in terms of the cluster plan around the green industries, that is specifically focusing on trying to bring those skills forward to facilitate the industry growth in that space. In terms of the actual differential between the figures, where we seem to be increasing but there'll be a larger decrease, I think that's something that we would probably need to take away to our skills colleagues and come back to you on in terms of whether the reading of that is that it creates an issue where the workforce is decreasing, because I certainly, the conversations I've had today are that we need more people working in that sector rather than less. So.
Yeah.
Again, Councillor Haig.
Yes, thank you. And I think it is difficult to look at one sector in isolation, because obviously other sectors are increasing and decreasing at the same time. So the flow of the workforce across them may be something that's hard to predict. And we also are seeing, you know, as I said, mentioned before, new technologies, you know, robots filling potholes or delivering your takeaway, you know, taking low-skilled jobs out of the market. But I think it's bringing in those higher skilled jobs, whether it is directly in green industries or in some other sector.
Few days there's also been a lot of debate about AI in terms of the jobs that it might be taking away, and what's going to happen to some of these lower skilled people who are going through university just now, and their skills might not be necessarily there because AI will be able to take away some of the university graduates what they've been learning. But I think that's more something to probably note down and to mention to Felix about developing a strategy maybe after the elections and see what can be done, because we can't ignore the effect on jobs, nor can we ignore the fact of AI, whether it does or doesn't take away jobs. I don't think there's the proof there. Councillor Haig?
Just to pick up there, I think, you know, what you're talking about is people who go to university and having the appropriate level of skilled jobs available for them, not that they are low-skilled people. There are, you know, they may take low-skilled jobs after university.
Yeah.
But that's not the same as them being low-skilled people.
Well,
it's about us appropriately using and developing those skills.
Yeah, what they were talking about was the fact that they couldn't repay their loans because they weren't getting decent enough paid jobs in order to repay the loans. Well, no, it's all tied in together. It's all part of economic growth. We need to get economic... Anyway, let's not get sidetracked onto that. Councillor Watson.
Great, thank you, Chair. So, I mean, Ruth, as you've mentioned, you're fully aware that we had the local growth plan at our last scrutiny, and I'm sure that you won't be surprised by this question. But obviously, you know, it's really important, isn't it, that we're ensuring that our local growth plan and our dreams within that are not going to conflict with our net zero climate goals. So I'm really interested to know what processes are in place to ensure that that is the case. And then I suppose a follow-up maybe is what practical steps can we take as scrutiny to ensure that the local growth plan is also delivering and we're not locking ourselves into high carbon growth?
Okay, so I think this feels like the tricky question again. No, so I think there's different levels of this. So although we've had a previous scrutiny session on the integrated settlement outcomes framework, as an organisation we are creating an outcomes framework that is wider than the slice that accords to integrated settlement. So first of all, what we have to do is get our targets in that wider piece right, so that we're creating the right balance of growth. And then we need to think about how we operate as an organisation and the different roles that we take in that space. So strategically, I think we always make sure that actually the different teams within our organisation and our partners all feed in looking at the different strategies that we produce through the different lenses. So the latest one being the local transport plan, which has had quite a high level of input both from internal but external teams around the environmental and carbon impacts that plan will have. I think that we then move, don't we, to our role where we are actually being the conveners, you know, within a system. And I suppose the role that Scrutiny plays in that is through sessions like this, where we are given the ideas of actually the role, the proposal that we may go and speak to Yorkshire Water about reservoir capacity if we haven't done it to the greatest extent so far, or where we should go and challenge national government around the getting the electricity supply certified more quickly than we can at the moment. I then think we move into the role where we deliver as a combined authority in West Yorkshire, and I think that what we are currently doing as a combined authority is designing an investment framework, and part of that investment framework must ensure that when we are deciding where we put our money, that the environmental and carbon impact is considered as part of that process. And then when we set our targets around our delivery, you know, we've heard some good examples from Home Energy West Yorkshire. We have to be making sure that our targets for our programmes may achieve a growth in jobs, but also have a target that's wider than just the job. It talks to the impact that the growth is having more broadly in terms of environment and climate. So that's quite a wordy answer, but I suppose there's different points in the system and different roles that we play, and the answer is slightly different for each of them.
Thank you, Ruth. And so it wasn't, obviously, I know you've come into place and not to put you on the spot, but so I'm really interested. So, you know, often we've talked about that we're going to develop our own carbon impact assessment, so we'll know if our transport, you know, what is the carbon impact of that going to be. I suppose it could. So, but is it planned that information is all going to come together into one place? So someone like Noel, who is delivering on the climate plan, can go, I now have an overview of, you know, if we're on target, if we're on target for our net zero goals, because I know the climate impact of the growth plan, and I can see the climate impact of what the decisions that we're making on transport, and I can see the climate impact of the decisions we're making on housing. Because at the moment I'm not hearing that is actually going to sit together, and it could be, and maybe somebody else knows that. I feel that there could be conversations when we put things into framework, but somebody has to be ultimately responsible for having that overview on it.
So I suppose the conversations that I had with Noel when I was in my substantive role were twofold. One was around, I'm using Noel as an example, but more broadly. One is the business planning process, whereby we create what our intent is as an organisation. And in that document, what we do is we set the targets for the year, and then we have a corporate plan that sits above that sets our targets and approach for the 4-year process. The person that's responsible for holding people to account to that would be the Director of Strategy. So we have a performance board internally, and in that space, that's where we have had many discussions about the fact, for example, that the solar panel scheme was not meeting its targets and what could be done to manage our performance in that space. So the performance board is the space where internally we review that. What we then do is we take our performance to FRCC at the moment, our performance reports. The bit that I think is the more intelligent bit is that in terms of our performance maturity, the way in which you would layer the data, which I think is speaking to your point, which is where at the moment the outcome element of that performance is just currently being strengthened because of the development of the outcome framework. So I think come 26, 27, you'll be able to take a cut of that data and specifically drill down deeper into it in terms of our climate and environment targets.
Yeah, I think Councillor Watson articulated this very nicely. I struggle with this a little bit sometimes because it can feel like, depending on what we're scrutinising, parts of the combined authority are sort of in conflict with themselves. And I guess this is sort of what this looks at with the local growth plan. And I think I've highlighted it before, as the chair did, you know, particularly in terms of AI, and one of the key areas we're looking at is expanding AI, expanding our AI industry, but that directly contradicts with net zero, and it probably directly contradicts with wanting jobs for young people because they're the first people to lose out. I don't want to steal the thunder on the question about Leeds Bradford that's coming up, but maybe it'll be solved with the integrated settlement and having that more freedom to pick the direction of travel. But it strikes me that there are elements where parts of what the combined authority are doing are conflicting with themselves, and it, as a scrutiny committee, that can be quite hard to ask about and probe about, because you would feel that someone should have the overview of that. And I think that's sort of the point, without getting into Leeds Bradford because that's about to come up, but that's another area where you could say that that's in conflict with the net zero ambition.
So I think you make a very valid point, and that's why the decisions that we make always have to take a balanced view. So it is actually, though, intrinsically more complicated than that, because even through our integrated settlement targets that we are agreeing with government at the moment, we are getting like the two sides of that coin that we will be held accountable to. So potentially like increased productivity and increased jobs. But one of the ways in which you can increase productivity is by automation. So there is that intrinsic challenge. I would say that Performance Board has the overview internally of what happens, and the reports go through into the member arena. And then I think that in terms of what we actually invest in at the beginning, internally Investment Board, and that the reports filter them through up into the project approvals that go to the combined authority.
So I don't believe it is at the present moment in time. I think, as you'll be aware from the report, we've got a zero emission bus programme and we're rolled out, I think, nearly 100 or so electric buses so far around the region. With, I think there was a commitment to order more made fairly recently. I know there was concern a while ago about whether or not, particularly in the hillier parts of the region, whether or not electrically powered buses would really have the sort of range over a course of a day or an operational cycle. I think at the moment the market, as I understand it, is favouring electrically powered buses rather than hydrogen. I know we've been doing work in the past on hydrogen-related, the role of hydrogen in the region from a transport and broader economic point of view, and I don't know whether, Noel, you wanted to say anything about that at all, but I don't believe at this present moment in time that hydrogen-powered buses are part of the plan for the fleet.
Seems fairly clear. I'm regularly using the new electric buses. Discussion on hydrogen with other modes, rail and others, seems to run into some difficulties generally, doesn't it, as a practical platform to expand. Okay, thanks for that.
Thank you. I'm just talking about electrically powered vehicles. You mentioned them, and it goes back to the other points about electricity for heat pumps. And so I've got two questions. Number one, we don't know for sure, and I don't know whether anybody could answer this at the moment, the provision of electricity, because we're obviously going to be asking a lot more of it in the future. I've got another point as well, and that is, how clear are we? Because the climate goals that we are discussing here are all about cleaner air. And how clear are we that the production of electricity is cleaner? And I know that this is a difficult one, but when we're seeing Drax Power Station sending wood pellets from North America on a diesel-powered boat, that ain't clean to me. So, overall picture, how confident are we? A, that we can actually produce all this electricity, and B, is it actually cleaner? In reality, I'm not convinced about either of those arguments yet.
So, if I can kind of come in on some of those points, I guess, how confident are we? Probably quite confident about the future electricity demands that we will need in the future are being factored into the system that we have. National Grid, Northern Power Grid don't, at this moment in time, foresee a problem with the growth projections and the electricity demand that will be generated by the transition to clean power. So they're pretty much in a place where they think they can cover the demand that will be generated. So to reassure, the people who really do run the wires and the pipes and everything, they do actually think that we will get to a point where they can cover what we need to. In terms of, is electricity cleaner? Drax is a really bad example because I wouldn't kind of cite that as being a particularly representative, I suppose, of the renewable energy deployment that we're likely to see. I think what you're going to see is a lot of possibly wind, onshore and offshore, lot of solar, mixed with kind of battery storage, and then very innovative uses of flexible tariffs when it comes to the time at which you use that electricity and how that interfaces with solar and kind of battery systems and what have you. So hopefully that reassures in terms of where we're heading, the direction of travel really does, it is in hand, it is being factored in, particularly given the kind of energy reforms that are happening. I mentioned earlier around the national, the NESO kind of picture around the regional energy strategic plans and their ability to try and plan in a much more coherent way than what we've been able to do previously. So hopefully that gives confidence that people are thinking about it. They are factoring this in. Their modelling, their scenario planning is actually allowing and taking account of the expected growth that we will see in electricity. Obviously there'll be things that might come along that mean we have to adjust strategies and things like that. But as where we stand at the moment, we're very much in a position where we think we know what's coming as much as possible, and we are planning for that in the way that is most appropriate.
Councillor Rhodes, you want something on a similar nature?
I do want to comment on the last statement being made in support of the issues that Councillor Smith has brought up. I'm very interested to know, in terms of the response that you've given. I'm sorry, I can't see your head. Just give me, sorry. Didn't want to be rude. I'm very interested in that because I'm sure, as the Chair knows, there's a planning application in for a new bus site, 24-hour operation in Whitefield. And bearing in mind the comments that you've just made and not having any further need to address the item in planning, because that's a different matter. The electricity issue, and you actually mentioned modelling for the future and what's coming up ahead of us. So at this present time, in terms of that proposal, forgetting about the planning application, is that something that's been modelled in when you're going to a new 24-hour site, whether it be Wakefield or anywhere else? And is that dependency then at present totally down to electricity? But how do you then go forward, as Richard was saying, in terms of the future and any models that may come the way? Or is it a factor of you use what's here now and then have to deal with it later on?
So in terms of what is already in the planning system, so that will be factored where it is known into the modelling that people like Northern Power Grid do, National Energy System Operator. They because they know about them, they are able to factor them into their models, which they are doing on a regular basis because this is their business, and that's where they need to have a handle on what's coming and where it is. To the extent where the National Energy System Operator is aware of kind of what's in the existing queue of applications and how much of that particular technology they need in a specific area, and they are quite prepared to kind of say, up to that point we can cope with it on the grid, but after that we can't cope with additional kind of additional applications on top of that. So there'll be like a threshold which they can meet, say, in terms of battery storage that's connected to the system or solar that's connected to the system. Once they reach those thresholds, they can start declining applications or to connect new applications. So they're constantly reviewing that pipeline. There's just been some reforms around that queue. In terms of going forward, as I said, they are continually monitoring and understanding kind of the situation, and their models will adjust, and they are building that using those models and forecasts in their kind of business planning processes. So they will be trying to capture all of this and being able to provide, kind of set up their business plan so they can cover the investment that will be needed to actually support connection of other things in the future. So hopefully where we've been previously has been very much gas is looked after over here, electricity is over here, and never do the two meet. We're now in a position where they are coming together in a much more coherent manner so that we can plan much more effectively about what is needed, when it's needed, and particularly with the process around the regional energy strategic plans, trying to get ahead of what's needed. So our growth, things that are in the local growth plan, very much trying to take them into account earlier so that when it comes to spades in the ground, the electricity connection or the energy infrastructure is there ready because it's been planned, the business plans have factored that in, and they've got an agreement to actually cover that infrastructure costs. The electricity system, well, the energy system is quite dynamic, so I think there will always be a need for interconnectors with the continent. So we will always have to, depending on the demand on the system at any 1 minute in time, need to draw on whatever is available to us. And that might be, based on market conditions, the cost of electricity through an interconnector with Europe, because it might be that in Denmark, the electricity is being generated really cheaply from the wind turbines there, so it all feeds into that.
Right. The next question comes from Councillor Felsted.
Right. It's a challenge on bus patronage. I've been looking through Wicker's own figures on this, and there's obviously a marked decline in patronage from when you record them on your system to the current date in time. And I've noticed, looking around various cities in the UK, Bradford and Leeds in particular, although I have done the whole West Yorkshire area, that there are more and more people working almost exclusively from home. And that begs the question, are we actually scaling up the bus service, or are we actually scaling it down to match the demand? I appreciate the fact that the bus services will run 24 hours a day, but given the decline in patronage and the amount of people who work almost exclusively from home, and I'll give you the two figures here, the national figure is 31%, Leeds has 34%, and Bradford has 21.5%. And the other regions are similarly affected. So I'm trying to understand the narrative behind the push to bring buses into public control and actually run them 24/7.
Mr. Nutter.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the question. Great challenge, and obviously the pandemic turned the world upside down, didn't it, in terms of how we sort of live our lives, and particularly how people, where people work, and the flexibilities that some of us enjoy, but there's a good chunk of the population who don't have that privilege, who still do need to get to, a place of work at sometimes unsociable times of the day. So the rationale for bringing buses back into public control is that ultimately what we currently have is a market which is in a vicious cycle of decline, which, as you say, patronage everywhere outside of London up until fairly recently was in decline, and we've seen what's happened fairly recently over the last couple of years with the announcement that the Mayor made to take buses back into public control, with bus operators cutting services, and you just end up in that cycle of decline. It becomes less attractive, fewer people use them, less revenue, etc., etc. So the rationale here is that we need to stop that cycle of decline, because our vision for the Mayor's vision for the Weaver network is it for it to become that, for us to have a seamless transport system like many other parts of the civilized world have, where you can drop from different forms of transport, bus onto rail, bus onto bus, and you can get where you need to be without necessarily always having to have the expensive challenge of owning and running a private vehicle. So bus is an important part of that mix, a very important part of that mix. It's obviously very important part for the lower paid part of our population, who typically, the statistics suggest, typically use buses more frequently. So we need to make sure that in a region where we want to have everyone enjoying the fruits of we just talked about growth, but fruits of the economy, that people can get around efficiently and easily, and a network that works for them, because at the moment it just doesn't. So that's the rationale. I don't know whether I've answered your question there.
I mean, that's absolutely fine. Where I'm actually going with this, I don't object to this buses coming under public control. I'm just trying to understand the journey. And one of the things you're saying today about electric buses is, are you going to change the type of bus to match the patronage? So I think the Mayor in a previous conversation said we're going to reinstate some of the routes, but if they're not patronised, we're going to withdraw them. So the question then becomes, do you change the type of bus that runs on that route from a double-decker to a single-decker to a 24-seater? Is that within the transport plan? And the reason I'm asking this today is I clearly can't ask it on the 13th.
I mean, it's a great challenge, but I guess it's an operational one around what's the incremental cost of operating a standard bus versus a smaller one. I suspect it's not that great. I mean, as you've hinted at, that the plan is to put back in the timetable that was there in March 2024, when we franchise bus services starting next year. But inevitably, our ambition is to grow the market for the Weaver network, buses being the first sort of core part of the network. Inevitably, councillors around this table and at the Combined Authority will have to be presented at some point with some challenging decisions, no doubt, about how we best grow that market, and where there'll be some standards that we all, and no doubt you all, will want customers and your residents to enjoy, but can we afford that based on the funding that we have and the revenue from the fare box that's coming in? So the sort of decision about whether or not we'll run a smaller bus versus a larger bus, we'll have to see how when we start to get the bids back in, what the sort of concession bidders are proposing there. But I'm afraid I'm sure will be thoughts about how efficient we can make the system.
Emmett wanted to come in on this issue.
Yeah, thank you. And it is about customer behaviour, I suppose, with buses. And I think we're seeing a few shifts. There's always a big uptick for people once they qualify for their free bus pass in bus usage, and I think that's really useful. But also with younger people and working from home, just because you're working from home doesn't mean you never want to leave the house. So maybe there's a complementary benefit there of actually we're taking cars off the road, because a second car isn't needed in a household, or people can live in a lifestyle that, they don't actually require a car. Both my children, the youngest soon to be about 30, neither of them drive, they don't have a licence. They live in places where, access to public transport is good. Alternatives such as cycling are good. You can walk to local facilities and live, a lifestyle that's perfectly reasonable. I know that that's more challenging in more rural areas, but I think we're never going to achieve a complete equity, and people make some choices about how and where they live and where they choose to locate themselves in relation to transport. So having a good, regular and reliable bus service is actually one of the biggest incentives for people to use it, because if it's infrequent, if it's poor quality, if it's cheaper to get in an Uber, then you start driving people into away from the bus service. And I think there's actually, especially amongst younger people and people who've got free bus passes, a real desire to use buses as a means of transport.
If Councillor Carter was here, she'd certainly be querying that particular comment, but that's not asking you to answer Councillor Carter's, who's not around to answer, but she would certainly be querying about the rural side of things. But James, do you want to make any comment, or just note it?
That's really the only comment. It's a very interesting observation, and to see how the behaviour changes depending on what stage of life you might be in, or how different generations, how the culture is different. And I was just thinking back to post-pandemic, rail demand, which I was very familiar with, used to be dominated by the 9 to 5 Monday to Friday, but the commute before the pandemic. After the commute, that fell off a cliff, and what dominated the demand patterns was the weekend. And the weekend travel on rail has been busier than it has ever been. You travel over to Leeds Station on a Sunday and it's heaving. It's only now we're getting back to sort of post-pandemic commuter sort of levels Monday to Friday, and that's in 2026. And the pandemic finished, I think, in 2022 or thereabouts. So, things, the world is changing always, isn't it? And patterns shift. So, yeah.
Councillor Smith.
I'm going to make a statement that might sound controversial, but I don't get buses in rural areas very much at all, if I'm honest with you. I get them completely in cities, because I go for walks and run quite a lot around the hills where I live, and I'm forever being passed by a bus going up these steep hills, spewing out black smoke everywhere, and there's nobody on it. And that, to me, just seems barking mad. And I get that sometimes you need to have a service, but if nobody's using it, it's not really doing anyone any good. And I've got 2 cars and a motorbike, right? I can't drive it. I've got long arms and legs, but I can't drive any vehicle. I drive one at once. So me having 3 vehicles in my house, it makes no difference, because I'm not making any more pollution because I'm driving one of them at once. So all of these things about buses and trains, they're all great ideas for people who live in cities. But for those of us, and I'm speaking for Geraldine not being here now, so I'm quite passionate about rural areas as well. The buses around my area come 3 times, 4 times a day. In some of the largest, smaller villages, maybe get an hourly service. But if nobody's on them, they're not doing any good for anyone. Just a point.
Councillor Patient.
No, thank you. It's interesting how our experiences differ. I mean, I live in a rural area as well, and the rural buses are really well frequented, actually. I think mostly from a point of view from the community, knowing that if they don't use it, they'll lose it. And actually, we've got some of our hilltop parishes at the moment, what's the word? Desperate actually for a service that connects a village above where I live called Midgley with Hebden Bridge, and are doing a lot of work in terms of generating some noise around that. So I hear your point. I think unless there's a desperate need, I think where I live's different in the fact that there's a huge high school there, so there's lots of people who use the bus as part of the commuter system as well. But I think making sure that interconnectivity of transport modes, whether it's the train, whether it's the bus, you know, whether it's making sure that you've got good access to accessible taxis as well, frankly, as well, ones that can take wheelchairs in them, is a really important part of that mix. But I think there is a message for us all to take back to our residents, which is that use it or lose the system, because currently where we're at in terms of that precarious moment of bringing buses back into public control, we all, I think it's a civic duty, and I know Councillor Carter would have said the same, it's a civic duty for us all to make sure that those buses and routes are in place.
Right, from one interesting subject to the final question, Councillor Felsted.
I'm just pitching this in here because it does affect what happens locally, particularly on emissions. So one of the things I've been looking at is the economic impact of Leeds Bradford Airport, what it brings into the country and what's taken out of the country. And I am willing to provide you with a narrative on that, but it certainly takes out a lot more than it delivers, substantially more, because obviously it's a tourist airport. But the elephant in the room here is currently there are about 4 million passengers per year leaving Leeds Bradford. So, and nobody will tell you what the CO2 emissions are for LBA unless you start doing the digging. You've got to speak to the DFE, you've got to work out the average number of hours flown and everything. So I'll try and put this quite simply to you. So the current output at ground level of LBA is the equivalent CO2 output of Leeds, Bradford and Calderdale combined. If I take it up to altitude and you include radiative force, it's the whole of West Yorkshire. We're going to double that size to 7 million passengers, so it's going to double again. And kind of what I'm driving at here is we're all trying to get houses energy efficient and CO2 neutral and everything. And at the same time, we're actually outputting more by travelling abroad on holiday, and there seems to be no legislation to actually drive down passenger numbers for those people who can most afford it. And there's a very tiny percentage of the population that do the majority of the flying, and yet you could fly away 15 times a year and there isn't a tax for the carbon you produce. So whilst you could be outwardly very carbon neutral at home, the reality is something completely different. So I know it's something that the combined authority can't influence. I just wanted it out there as a statement of fact.
I'd just say that, yeah, I entirely agree with you, and I think, you know, it's so difficult with Scope 3 emissions and what we do and what we don't measure, and I entirely get your point. Don't just sympathise, empathise. I'm entirely behind you beating the drum, you know. I think you're exactly right. There's definitely a case, and you kind of said it, I think the CA's power in this, local authorities' powers in this are limited. This is a conversation with national government about carbon taxes, and you know, the fact that, you know, 99% of emissions from aviation are from billionaires, aren't they? They're flying backwards and forwards. Unfortunately, not many billionaires in West Yorkshire either. So, again, not something we can directly impact. But I guess it's not a response. It's more of a nod of approval in terms of what you're saying. But I guess what that doesn't mean is it doesn't let us off the hook of taking action ourselves, and we still need to do that regardless of the point that you've well made.
I think the thing is here, if you look at regional airports, and LBA's a regional airport and the reopening Doncaster, the perception and the belief is that they bring business into the economy, and I don't dispute that at all, but it's what they take out of the economy, because it does create jobs, and I've got the job creation numbers and everything going forward. It's just...
Yeah, and I accept what you're saying, and but also I do think that airports are good drivers for the local economy. And you also have to say that an airport, a local airport, when there's very little alternative ways that are efficient and cheap to get to Europe and beyond, is saving longer journeys to other airports. So there's always a balance in these things. And if only someone could manage to build high-speed rail links to Europe from the north of England, then the alternative to flying would be much more attractive.
My residents give me every week, because my ward backs right onto the runway. So I get both sides, and it's a very difficult thing, because those that live really close to it are very worried about it. A lot of my residents say, well, I keep telling them to cut down on their climate impact, and yet I'm equally happy to have the growth of the airport, because it provides the jobs within the area, and it is a big dilemma. Do we need the growth of the jobs and getting people in and out, making it Leeds more attractive and Bradford more attractive to people? Because I don't know how to solve that one. I mean, it's always one that's been brought up since I joined the Combined Authority. Why did the Combined Authority not take into consideration the climate impact of the airport when it's actually in West Yorkshire? Well, there's a big debate. I mean, nationally they can't agree either who should be taking responsibility for it. If you take the operation of the airport itself, that's one thing. That's quite minimal, probably. It's the actual aircraft that's the issue. But anyway, we'll park that one there. So, can I bring this item to a conclusion? I think it's been an excellent debate. I think every officer has been challenged. Ruth, hopefully you've learned a lot about your portfolio and the issues that you're going to have to manage the next time you come back again. But good luck to you. So thank you all very much. Thank you for everybody coming along, and thank you, Councillor Patient, for taking. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to look through the answers that we've got, and we'll try and pull out some actions, which we'll then send through to the to the members of scrutiny, and we'll then decide where's the best place to take them, whether it's a recommendation to the Climate Committee, whether it's a recommendation to the Mayor, because we've had some of the soft power that the Mayor could do. So we'll collate those, we'll copy everybody in, we'll get some agreement, and then at the meeting in March we'll agree those as our decisions and conclusions that we've reached on that particular thing. Because in fairness, when we did make comments the last time on the climate policy, Noel and Councillor Patient took them on board and reflected back on what we said, and did change some of the things that were there. But scrutiny should never ever expect everything they say to be necessary to be changed, because otherwise they wouldn't be in the position. But I think we've shown in the past that we've worked with the climate side of things, we've come up with constructive comments, and let's see if we can do the same this time. So can I thank everybody for their attendance here today. Thank you. Now, the next item is next steps and work plan. Well, we've got one meeting left, which will be, sorry,
Chair, are we okay to leave?
yeah.
Thank you.
You had enough of me already?
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, we've got one meeting left, and we're going to, so it's going to be a meeting with the Mayor on the 13th of March. We'll have two items on the agenda. One is looking back at the previous recommendations that we've made to find out what the Mayor's response to them has been, and the second one is on mass transit. Now, the mass transit will be based purely on a public document that we'll be getting passed to the Combined Authority. It will not include any confidential reports or anything like that. So we need to be sure that when we're asking our questions the next time, we stick to what's in the public domain, not heard on rumour mill or heard on anything else like that. We need to keep to the facts. So, and then it will be up to the successor board to decide how they want to take forward the other items on the work plan. Now, I think we've got a planned briefing on cyber security coming up sometime as well before the year end, haven't we? Have we any idea of a date on that yet? I know you were somebody tried to pin you down yesterday at governance and audit on it.
I thought that date had been fixed. Is it not yet fixed? Is it availability that they're trying to pin down?
It's based on a couple of things. It's going through the internal boards.
Okay, that's fine.
I mean, governance and audit asked exactly the same question yesterday. When is this briefing going to take place? Because governance and audit have got cyber security is one of their concerns in terms of moving things forward. So they want to know, as do we, and I've agreed with the Chair of Governance and Audit that we'll have a joint meeting, a joint presentation, because I'm finding there's a lot of overlap with what Governance and Audit do and what we do. And so we need to work together on it and decide who's going to take forward which part of the cybersecurity side of things.
So I'll chase that up because I did respond and said that was in process. They were looking for a date, and the questions are arising out of the internal audit and cybersecurity. So there's synergy between the two. So it's right that you do it together.
So right. So the next meeting's on the 13th of March. Thank you for your attendance today, and thank you for the questions you've come
Chair.
up with. Yes.
Chair, just on the forward programme, I wonder if one of the issues we could put in terms of potential forward items is the introduction of strategic planning. Because that's quite a significant issue, and potentially I think the new committee may well want to have a look at it.
Yeah, we can add that into the list that we're handing on to the successor board. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.